Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Chadallo.
Plenty to chat about again this week, Chaz. We're going to be looking at attempts to ban TikTok in the United States or force its sale. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. is looking for a running mate. Are you interested?
No.
Okay.
And I'm going to be busting some malarkey about an allegedly secret plan to invade America with plane loads of unvetted illegal immigrants. But first...
Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden officially wrapped up their respective party presidential nominations this week. Not that there was any doubt in that matter. Reporters, though, did ask President Biden whether he would take part in a presidential candidate debate against Donald Trump, as is scheduled for later this year. You'll recall in 2020, Trump gave a fairly outlandish performance at the pair's first ever debate. It was later revealed that Trump had already tested positive to COVID, putting many people at risk in those pre-vaccine days, including Biden and his debate coach, Chris Christie, who caught COVID and nearly died of the disease as a result. So, would Joe Biden be prepared to have a rematch? Well, his answer was not an immediate yes.
Mr. President, will you commit to a debate with former President Trump? It depends on his behavior.
Biden better agree to debate, John, because Trump will not be letting him get away with that. Trump is already challenging Biden to debates now, saying, I'd like to debate him now, but Biden can't do it because he can't talk. He can't do anything. So you can see he's going to tie the debates to Biden's age, of course, and if Biden shows any unwillingness to debate, Trump will not let it go. He'll just be a dog with a bone. Biden would look terrible. So I find it odd that Biden's buddies seem to be leaning against Biden debating. Senate Democrat Whip Dick Durbin, for example, said, I would think twice about it. I've been physically present at one of Trump's debates with Hillary Clinton, and I watched him do outrageous things and say outrageous things. It's just an opportunity for him to display his extremism. And Biden's closest advisor, Senator Chris Coons, said, I'm not going to get ahead of myself on campaign strategy. But Coons said there was no reason to dignify Trump as a candidate by debating him, especially given Trump refused to debate any of his Republican opponents. Now, I think that would be a huge mistake if he followed their advice. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it is hypocritical of Trump to turn around and say, oh, yes, he must debate me after I refused to debate my rivals for the Republican nomination. The other thing that Trump is, well, certainly going against conventional wisdom. Usually in presidential debates, both sides are claiming underdog status, saying, oh, well, my opponent is such a gifted debater, a professional politician. I'm but a humble, speaker of truths. He's saying that Joe Biden literally cannot speak.
Yes.
I mean, that is setting the expectations bar right down there.
Yeah.
So, for Joe Biden, unless he really is physically and mentally impaired come October, November, of course he should debate, and he'll do very, very well. That being said, even though Biden did better than a lot of people expected in last week's State of the Union, the points at which Biden didn't do so well was when he was getting consistently heckled by Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. Sometimes in a senatorial-style interjection, he can bat them away quite playfully. But if somebody is going at him, and then he tries to think of a clever response, and then he gets a bit flustered, can't find the words, etc., he's not at his best. He can't. So, yeah, absolutely, Donald Trump could hector and pester Joe Biden into looking like a doddering fool. That's the risk for him. So there is definitely a danger.
I think you're right about that. What Trump's tactic will be, he will definitely be trying to hector him and put him off his game. He tried that in 2020 as well, and at times he did put him off his game, but it just didn't matter in the long run. I think you've nailed the critical point though, and as expectations. Debates aren't about who wins the debate. Everyone thinks their side won the debate.
Yes.
What matters is, do you meet the expectations? And in Joe Biden's case, the expectations could not be lower. Yeah. So you know that he's going to clear the bar just by turning up and not tripping over the corner of the stage.
Biden famously said in that first debate, the most memorable thing about it was, will you just shut up, man? So he just needs to have a zinger like that to try and put Trump in his place briefly. Polls showed that people didn't really like the kind of amped up, turns out COVID positive version of Donald Trump that turned up at that first debate. But I am always mindful of the famous quote from the late comedian George Carlin, who said, never argue with an idiot because they'll drag you down to their level and beat you on experience. That's the problem with debating Trump. Because it's kind of becomes a pox on both of your houses. And then, of course, the question is is it a three-way debate with Robert Kennedy, which is something we're going to look at as well, because Robert Kennedy right now is doing very strongly in the polls against both Biden and Trump. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls for a three-way contest, Trump leads Biden by over 4 points, while Kennedy wins 15% support, and that is the magic number that should qualify Kennedy to take part in the presidential debates.
Yeah, and importantly, when you take RFK out of those polls, the lead for Trump goes from 4.3 points to 1.8 points. So Kennedy's presence helps Trump by 2.5 points over Biden. And here's why. As we've said before, the critical group are the so-called double haters. About 15 to 20% of the electorate hates both Trump and Biden. And the latest USA Today poll shows 25% of the double haters support Trump, 18% support Biden, 21% of them support Kennedy, more than the share that support Biden. That is where he loses that extra few percent to Trump, John. Although, interestingly, even though only about 1 in 4 surveyed people overall said that they might change their minds before November, 75% of RFK Jr. supporters said that they might change their minds. So you can see how his numbers might erode, as often happens with independent candidates as we near an election.
Yeah, indeed. Robert F. Kennedy has announced that he has already selected his vice presidential running mate, and he will make an announcement towards the end of the month. The Washington Post this week reporting that Kennedy has spoken with NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers and former independent Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Now, Aaron Rodgers, not particularly well known in this country, but he is a very well-known footballer in the United States. He is also well known as a COVID vaccine skeptic. He claimed that he'd been immunised against the disease, which allowed him to keep playing under NFL rules, but then he later disclosed actually he hadn't been vaccinated. He had instead taken ivermectin, that's the drug typically used to worm livestock. Well, it has no effect on COVID, but he says, you know, that was good enough for me to be immune. He does sound perfect for Kennedy. Jesse Ventura as well, you might recall, he's the pro wrestler turned independent governor of Minnesota, who arguably helped to blaze a trail for other celebrity anti-politicians like Arnold Schwarzenegger and even Donald Trump, I suppose. Kennedy has reportedly also spoken to a list of other potential VPs, including former Democratic presidential candidates Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang, even motivational speaker Tony Robbins. Kennedy does need to nominate a vice president in order to qualify for the ballot in several states. So this is not just a hypothetical exercise. There is a reason that he needs to do this right now, as well as building up a sense of anticipation, a bit of showbiz around it, and there's also, you know, a lot at stake when it comes to picking a vice presidential candidate for any candidate, independent or major party. It is the first major decision for any candidate for the White House. Sometimes it can provide them with balance, maybe help them win an important state or an important demographic. Race and gender are often considerations as well to balance out the ticket, maybe their area of expertise, like Joe Biden, who helped to allay concerns that Barack Obama was too young and lacked foreign policy experience in 2008. That was the year as well that John McCain made a pretty fateful choice, choosing Sarah Palin as his running mate. For a time, it looked like a masterstroke, a game changer. But then with remarks like this, you might recall with Katie Couric, it kind of backfired.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years.
And it was in 1992 that businessman Ross Perot was running as an independent presidential candidate. He wanted somebody with foreign policy chops, so he picked retired Admiral Jim Stockdale. He was a highly decorated Vietnam War veteran. He'd been held prisoner of war, spent 4 years in solitary confinement. He was a war hero, but in his 1992 VP debate against Al Gore and Dan Quayle, well, Stockdale tried to introduce himself to voters, and he began in a rather memorable way with this opening statement.
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I? Why am I here? I'm not a politician, everybody knows that, so don't expect me to use the language of the Washington Insider. 37 years in the Navy, and only one of them up there in Washington. And now I'm an academic.
It wasn't a bad start, but his performance in the rest of the debate was pretty terrible. He at one point even asked the moderator to repeat a question because he'd turned his hearing aid off. So he became the butt of a lot of old man jokes, and that sort of, who am I, what am I doing here, took on a whole other meaning, and it was pretty difficult for him. He just wasn't ready for prime time, unfortunately. In 1968 as well, a choice that backfired, segregationist third-party presidential candidate George Wallace tapped as his VP Curtis LeMay. Now, LeMay had been in charge of the US firebombing campaign in Japan towards the end of World War II, and he was a strong advocate for using nuclear weapons in both Korea and then against North Vietnam. So to many, he came across as a dangerous warmonger. He was, in fact, the inspiration for Dr. Strangelove. So these people that you think are going to help you, sometimes, if they're not ready for prime time or they're just revealed to be a bit of an extremist, it can become a problem.
Certainly can. Well, let's look at the potential problem here, which I think people are expecting Aaron Rodgers to say yes.
Who's coming to the end of his football career? He's had some injuries and so on.
He likes the sound of his own voice. He's the other guys, by the way, Kennedy said no. So he's been forced into this kind of choice between Jesse Ventura and Aaron Rodgers.
Although Tulsi Gabbard is saying it today, she's just saying, oh, it'd be an honour to be selected. So even though she hosted a fundraiser for Trump last week, she's still going, Robert F. Kennedy, you know my number.
Well, the thing is that Aaron Rodgers is an extremely charismatic individual.
Right.
Like, he certainly has some wacky theories.
Yes.
I mean, you only mentioned one or two of them. Like there's also the one where he's got wacky theories about Sandy Hook as well, Alex Jones-style theories.
Right.
He's also got the theory that part of his recovery apparently is listening to dolphin sex sounds.
Really?
Yes, apparently he says that's...
Where does he get the dolphins?
I don't want to know. Like he has some fruity ideas.
Yeah.
Quite famously, when he met one of his fellow quarterbacks, Deshaun Kaiser, he said this:
"Shut the door," and the first thing that comes out of Aaron Rodgers' mouth was, "Do you believe in 9/11?" What? Do I believe in 9/11? Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't I? He was like, "You should read up on that." Okay.
So that's Aaron Rodgers. But having said that, he is one of the great footballers, and that matters in America.
And his personal appeal seems to mean that, yes, he's got some goofy conspiracy theories, but it's almost seen as a quirk. He's well liked despite that, in the way that someone like Alex Jones is certainly not.
Yeah, he's got a sense of humour about him as well. Some of these theories of his, you're never quite sure if he's serious or not. Like he is quite funny. He's quite lackadaisical. He's the average kind of a guy.
Right.
Like
deliberately provocative.
Yeah, like so, and he is charismatic, like I said. So I could see him winning a lot of votes. I don't think people should write him off, all because of these ridiculous theories.
Interesting.
Also, he does fit the RFK brand. RFK himself is a pretty weird kind of candidate.
Yeah, he said that the CIA killed his father and his uncle, John F. Kennedy. He's also cast doubts over 9/11, and of course, most famously, Kennedy has questioned the effectiveness of vaccines, not just COVID. He was an anti-vaxxer before it was fashionable.
But the other thing about RFK is that, once again, much like Aaron Rodgers, really, he's just an everyday person. He comes off as a nice guy. In fact, he comes off a lot nicer than Aaron Rodgers, to be honest. He comes off as a really, really pleasant, nice guy who approaches things in a way that a normal politician wouldn't. Like, for instance, let's say you're accused of palling around with Jeffrey Epstein, and you admit that you did.
I don't need to hear these again.
I'm going to keep on bringing up these allegations, John.
I've answered these in the past.
The internet is very clear about you. Anyway, let's say that you're accused of that. What you probably shouldn't do is defend yourself by saying something like this.
You run into everybody in New York. I mean, I knew Harvey Weinstein. I knew Roger Ailes. I knew O.J. Simpson came to my house. Bill Cosby came to my house.
You shouldn't say, I pal around with every sexual abuser. That's a weird response, but that's RFK. He just comes off as a non-politician, and that is his attraction. By the way, You may note who tweeted that clip out, a lady by the name of Liz Smith. Get used to seeing clips from her because the DNC is building its first team to counter third-party and independent presidential candidates. And who have they hired to be part of it? But Democratic operative Liz Smith. So expect to be seeing a lot more clips where that came from, especially with these guys.
Yeah, Liz Smith last seen on this program when she was involved in Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign, and they obviously used a lot of social media in that effort as well. I mean, looking at Robert F. Kennedy as well, it's very interesting to see, you know, if he didn't have that neurological condition that has affected his voice so badly, I think he would be a chance of getting 15 to 20% of the vote. I think the difficulty for him is going to be, as well as his sometimes crazy ideas, is that he's very, very hard to listen to. It's very hard for him to get through a speech. It'll be hard for him to get through a debate. He doesn't sound particularly well. He does sound damaged. And given that there's clearly some trauma in forming some of the weird ideas that he has, I think, you know, it could well be that he will be fairly comprehensively destroyed and demonised by the Democrats, who do see him quite rightly right now as a major threat, a greater threat to Biden than he is to Trump.
They are coming for him, but all I'd say is he's unlikely to be making a lot of speeches. He's much more likely to be doing podcasts.
Yeah.
That he's coming through it from a different angle to a normal campaign.
Yeah, very
So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, indeed. This week on Planet America, we spoke to former Democratic Congressman Joe Cunningham. He's now the National Director of No Labels. It's a centrist political group. It's chaired by former Democrat Senator and Vice Presidential nominee Joe Lieberman, who quit the Democratic Party and became an independent. He supported John McCain's presidential campaign when he was running as a Republican. So these are kind of cross-party folks. No Labels is pushing ahead with a plan to run a unity presidential ticket this year, with one Republican and one Democrat on it. Now, several prominent centrists have flirted with the idea of running a No Labels ticket. They've all taken a pass so far. West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, a Republican, have thought about it and ultimately said no. Well, Joe Cunningham told us this week that No Labels is only going to run a candidate for presidency if they think that candidate can win. And they are prepared to pull the plug on that campaign if they think the ticket is not viable as we get towards September, October and the election in November. Although how they would do that once the candidates are on the ballot is a little bit unclear. And it's also very unclear as to whether there are any guardrails against the No Labels campaign being hijacked as an effort to either hurt or help Biden or Trump. Here's more of what Joe had to tell us.
Well, I expect that to be flushed out through the interviewing process and vetting. Again, you know, we're looking to offer this ballot line to a ticket that we believe can win outright. And we think the appetite is there as well, you know, based upon polling that we've done, tracking that we've done. So, you know, it's not like we're interested in going through all this effort, a year and a half of gaining ballot access to simply just throw sand in the gears. You know, we set out in this and very clearly that we're going to wait till Super Tuesday, find out if America was happy with these presumptive nominees. And if they weren't, and if we could find a ticket put forward, we'd offer it. Now, if it goes on and we come to the conclusion that America is happy with these two choices, then that's something we can, we can bridge that gap later on. But as it stands now, you know, America's not happy. And the ticket that we would put forward, we would have hoped would be a ticket that could win.
The centre-left political organisation Third Way has been raising the alarm about the potential impact of a No Labels candidate. They maintain while they have no chance of winning, it could well hand the election to Donald Trump. We spoke to Kate deGruyter, Third Way's Director of Communications.
Would you say you've already done your job by scaring off the big-name candidates for No Labels? I mean, who cares what No Labels do with some no-name candidate that nobody's going to vote for?
We've been working very hard to make that case publicly, and we have absolutely seen a big list of high-profile names walk away from the No Labels bid. That includes Senator Joe Manchin, their co-chair Larry Hogan, Senator Kyrsten Sinema said the same thing, and you know we've even had reporting in the last week that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp has also said no. So. They're coming up empty, but our concern is that it doesn't take much. What we have seen is that 6 of the 7 states that were decided by less than 3% of the vote in 2020 went to Joe Biden. But it would only take a very small number of third-party votes to flip some of those states red for Trump. And I'll give you one example. Arizona is one of the key battleground states that everyone is going to be watching this November. From 2016 to 2020, there was a decline of 86,000 fewer third-party voters in Maricopa County, Arizona alone. That is the main population center for the Arizona state vote. If a fraction of those folks are tempted to join a third-party ticket, they could wipe away the 10,000 vote advantage that Joe Biden had in the state last year. The third-party votes exist in the places that will decide the election. And so that's why we are continuing to pound the pavement to make sure that there is not one serious candidate that we have overlooked, who we haven't worked to try and educate about the danger that this ticket will be a dangerous spoiler.
Kate, the chair of No Labels, Joe Lieberman, has said they won't be a spoiler, and if they don't think they can win the election, then they will end the campaign before November. So don't they deserve a chance to try and find a winning ticket?
There is a high number of folks that are not looking forward to the presidential election, but that doesn't mean that they are going to be ready to pull the lever for a third-party candidate. The challenge that No Labels is encountering is that the slice of the electorate that is truly unattached to either party is much slimmer than the large numbers that they tout, and there tend to be very wildly divergent views among that group of people. You might have folks that would prefer a much more far left candidate, as well as folks that would have a farther right candidate to meet some of their views. And so finding a single nominee who can unite that group is a challenge. And frankly, our numbers show that there's just not enough of a base there to run a winning national campaign. Now, that being said, they had said over the past year on many occasions that they were only going to go forward if they had a path to win. We have not seen a single poll or data point that they have been able to point to that shows that they can be competitive in a head-to-head race against 2 former presidents. Instead, their own polling has actually shown that they hand Donald Trump a 5-point advantage when their ticket enters the race. When it's a head-to-head, just Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's essentially a tie, according to No Labels' own polling. But the addition of their ticket hands Donald Trump an advantage.
You guys are focusing a lot on No Labels, but do you really think No Labels is a greater threat to Biden than RFK Jr. is?
Right now, I would say yes, and here's why. No Labels is actually on the ballot in far more states than RFK is, and they're on the ballot in some of the key battleground states that will decide the White House. No Labels is currently on the ballot in 16 states, and that includes Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina. Right now, RFK is only on the ballot in Utah. Now, he's making some progress, and so we're continuing to watch that, because we do believe that any third-party candidate in 2024 who divides the anti-Trump coalition is dangerous. And we think that there's a very real possibility that if RFK can get on the ballot in those places that will matter, he too could be dangerous.
Kate, could a more prominent No Labels candidate change the equation instead of people who tried and failed like Nikki Haley and Dean Phillips? What if hypothetically they convinced Oprah Winfrey to run for president?
If they can get Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey or Taylor Swift, then we are in a totally new ballgame. But there is absolutely no indication that that is remotely in the possibility for them. The most recent candidate that they've talked about has been a former lieutenant governor out of Georgia, who frankly I had to Google. That is not a ticket that can compete against 2 former presidents who are going to have $1 billion at their disposal to run a massive national campaign.
Do you take No Labels at their word about their intentions, or do you think they could be a deliberate Republican stalking horse?
We have worked very hard to take them at their word. There are certainly folks out in the ecosystem who have questioned their motives. We have not taken that tact. We believe that they are trying to find a way forward, and our concern is that they have a strategy and tactics that are not going to take them to the outcome that they are seeking. So what we have worked very hard over the last year and a half is to point to the historical, electoral, the polling and public opinion research data about the electorate to try and make our case to both No Labels and to others in their ecosystem who might be contemplating working with them on this bid about exactly why their strategy cannot achieve the ends that they seek.
A big clue, of course, Kate, to their possible motives is to follow the money. Who is funding them? Do we know where that money is coming from?
No, and that's one of the very frustrating things about this process. No Labels is currently operating as a 501c4, which means that they can operate using unlimited amounts of anonymous money to fund their efforts. We know very little about the folks who stand to benefit from this ticket, and frankly, who will be deciding the candidate at the top of their bid. What we do know from some public reporting is that there are a lot of pretty deep red Republicans, including folks in the Trump orbit, who are cheering them. And in fact, Donald Trump himself was tweeting positively about a No Labels ticket just last week. What our concern is that there are perhaps some folks in their orbit who see this as Donald Trump's best hope to get the majority that he would need to win. He's got a hard ceiling here. He can't get above 50%, but he desperately needs the help of third parties to divide the anti-Trump majority and to clear his path to victory. And that's why we've seen a lot of voices in the MAGA wing of the party actually cheering on No Labels.
So for those who are disturbed about the electoral duopoly, I'm sure you understand where they're coming from. What do you advise that they should do to fight against the status quo in a way that won't elect a candidate that they hate?
Look, there are a whole bunch of electoral reforms that would help make the election process more democratic and would give a stronger voice to folks in the mainstream. We are a center-left organization. There are initiatives like ranked choice voting, opening up primaries and caucuses to really ensure that it's not just a tiny group of people making the decision about who is going to be nominated and running for the two parties. And I think that you have to build from the ground up. I think it is very difficult to imagine how you can launch a successful presidential bid with no national base of support. But you could absolutely see how, a state or regional push that builds support might be able to help bring more independent voices into the Congress or perhaps the Senate, where having a few folks dedicated to seeking compromise and common sense could have a real impact, and that would give you a foundation to build from. But that's not what we see happening here with this No Labels plan. And with a second Donald Trump term on the line, this is not the right way to go about building a successful national campaign.
Kate deGruyter, thanks for being with us on the Fireside Chat.
Thanks for having me.
The United States House of Representatives has passed a bill this week requiring the video sharing service TikTok to find a new owner or face a ban in the United States. And unusually, the vote in Congress wasn't even close.
The yeas are 352, the nays are 65. One present, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without the objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Now, maybe you know what TikTok is, maybe you've never heard of it, ask your kids or your grandkids, but I can tell you that TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. It's called ByteDance. And lawmakers in the United States argue that that company, because it's based in China, could be forced to hand over the personal information of the estimated 170 million American TikTok users to the Chinese government. And similarly, that the Chinese government could get into the back end of ByteDance and manipulate their algorithms and be feeding maybe pro-Chinese propaganda or anti-American propaganda or anti-Israel propaganda into their TikTok feeds. Now, as well as voting for this bill, which of course could see the ban in the United States on TikTok imposed, Democrat Congressman Jeff Jackson, he wanted to explain the decision after his yes vote. Ironically, he then posted that video on TikTok, but he says, look, this bill isn't about a ban. It is, though, about forcing a sale.
I don't think TikTok is going to be banned. There was a bill to ban TikTok last year, but it didn't pass. It didn't even get a vote. TikTok may be sold to another company, but it'll continue to operate.
Yeah, although the head of TikTok says that, well, if we sell, then we'll get banned in China, and we've got 750 million users in China. So they're finding themselves in a no-win position. They might take the ban instead of a sale in the United States. President Biden, for his part, says if that bill passes the Senate and lands on his desk, he will sign it into law.
Do you still support banning TikTok? Would you sign that bill?
If they pass it, I'll sign it.
But less supportive is former President Donald Trump, who has changed his position on this issue a couple of times now. A TikTok flip-flop, if you will. Here's Trump back in 2020.
We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things. There are a couple of options, but a lot of things are happening. So we'll see what happens. But we are looking at a lot of alternatives with respect to TikTok.
There are a lot of things.
There are a lot of alternatives. We're looking at a lot of things, but in the end, all he did was issue an executive order. It did compel TikTok to be sold to an American company, but as with a lot of Donald Trump's executive orders, it was taken to court and the court threw it out. They say, sorry, Mr. President, you don't have the power to do that. And now Trump has entirely changed his tune because he says, well, actually, people like TikTok and, well, he doesn't like the alternative in Facebook.
Frankly, there are a lot of people on TikTok that love it. There are a lot of young kids on TikTok who will go crazy without it. There are a lot of users. There's a lot of good, and there's a lot of bad with TikTok. But the thing I don't like is that without TikTok, you can make Facebook bigger. And I consider Facebook to be an enemy of the people, along with a lot of the media.
But that pesky media is not convinced there isn't more to it than that. Could it have anything to do, they wonder, with Republican megadonor Jeff Yass, who has been a critic of Trump up until recently, donating to rivals including Vivek Ramaswamy and Chris Christie. Yass met with Trump recently and is now reportedly set to support his campaign in a big way. And Jeff Yass's company also happens to have a 15% stake in ByteDance, the Chinese parent company to TikTok.
I do not know what you're suggesting, John. When Yass met up with Trump, nothing suspicious happened.
Steve Bannon has suggested that you've been paid off to switch your view. How did your view change? How did that come about? And did you have a conversation with Jeff Yass about it?
No, I didn't. I met with him very briefly. I made a speech and I said hello to him and his wife, who's lovely. And actually, her primary thing was on education. She wants choice, as I do. And she mentioned to me more than anything, we talked about education. It was a meeting that lasted for a few minutes. No, the only one I met was, I met them both. And, I don't think I ever met him before, but he never mentioned TikTok.
Listen to the man. Nothing happens. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, well, certainly it is a fairly abrupt turnaround. Some people are saying, well, this is what happens when you put someone like Donald Trump under extreme financial pressure from all these court cases. He has to basically become a cab for hire and take money from whoever with whatever strings attached, even if those strings go all the way back to Beijing.
There are other options as well, Like, for instance, he might just want to win an election.
Sure.
Because a lot of people associate TikTok with really young kids. Actually, that's kind of old hat now. They're actually going down in popularity amongst the teenagers. Now, their prime demographic are millennials. 30-somethings, the late 20-somethings are all the Gen Zs. They're voters. Yeah. And so Trump might not want to annoy all those 30-somethings because he wants to win an election. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why he might have changed.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, that this did pass the House where once Trump's opposition to the bill became known, it still flew through. But it went very, very quickly, which is interesting now because Speaker Mike Johnson is also now saying, oh, yes, we're going to do a foreign aid bill. We're going to get money for Ukraine and Israel. But it's essentially they're just going to want to rush these things through before Trump can get too noisy about it and then move on.
But the interesting thing about this is I was surprised by that as well, how quickly they got through. Surprisingly, I would have expected the Senate to rubber stamp this completely because it's all about being anti-China. I thought the Senate would be all over that. Yeah. But apparently, the Senate are hemming and hawing about it a little bit. It might not get through the Senate, which is not predictable at all. And we're going to find out. At the very least, Rand Paul is saying that's not getting through me, which means it's going to take at least a week of procedure. And in that time, it starts to grind. The gears start to grind. They've only got, I think, 3 weeks worth of time left before they got to do stuff which is really, really important.
Yeah.
So they don't have much time to waste.
Yeah.
So it might not get through the Senate.
We'll see when a few more intelligence officials troop up to Capitol Hill and start talking to senators about the risk it poses, because it is shrouded in secrecy what the big concern is. American governments at all levels and agencies have tended to say to their employees, get TikTok off your phone. You can't have this on a government device. Is that because it can be used with spyware? Is it because they could be hacking those phones and getting either sensitive data or even just personally embarrassing data to, flip people old school? How do you get somebody to spy for you? You get photos of them in a compromising position. Now it's off their own phone.
We're going to talk about this again undoubtedly, but one important point I want to make is that we keep on talking about it being banned if they don't sell it. It's not going to get banned, okay? What this bill says is they take it off the App Store.
Yes.
170 million Americans already have it on their phone, okay? It's too late. It's there, right? And for the people who want to get it after that, they can just download it from China. China will just put it on the server and they'll be able to get it from China. So they're not going to ban TikTok anyway. They're just going to make it slightly more inconvenient. So TikTok's here to stay regardless. We shouldn't let the hype consume this story.
All right, well, we're nearly out of time, but before we do run out of time, let's bust some malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Now, back on Super Tuesday, Donald Trump began his press conference by referring to something a little unexpected.
They flew 325,000 migrants, flew them in over the borders into our country.
Well, that was a surprise, but he wasn't the only one talking about these flights. The whole conservative news world was ablaze with this story, reported by the deeply immigration-skeptical Centre for Immigration Studies. They revealed that Customs and Border Protection had apparently approved secretive flights that in the last year alone had ferried hundreds of thousands of inadmissible aliens. Some interesting language there, I think you'll agree. Secretive, ferried, inadmissible aliens. Particularly feral about this story was Elon Musk, who tweeted repeatedly about how it was treason indeed and how this administration is importing voters and creating a national security threat from unvetted illegal immigrants, and that it is highly probable that the groundwork is being laid for something far worse than 9/11. And finally, it was amazing that they kept this secret for so long. Well, it wasn't secret to me. I knew about these migrants because I read Border Patrol press releases. Party. Every single month, they publish the number of migrants under that program, grouped by nationality. It's right there on their website as well. Then again, I do have a bit more spare time than Elon does because I don't spend all day and night tweeting out hysterical garbage. What they're referring to is a parole program involving no more than 30,000 asylum seekers per month from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Haiti. And these are not secretive or new programs. America has been using private parole programs to admit refugees since the 1950s. There's a very well-known program involving Cuban migrants and their families that's been running since 2007, for example. And by the way, the flights are not only not secretive, but they don't even exist. These people just catch normal flights to international airports like normal people. And they do that because they pay for their own airfares. And they only come because a private sponsor is prepared to look after them and help them adjust and to get work. They stay for 2 years while their original country is a mess, and then their time is either extended or their country improves, and then they go home. This is nothing scary. Canada has been doing this for ages as well. They have the world's longest private sponsorship program, and other countries have tried it as well, including Australia. The theory is that since the refugees have a pre-existing tie to their sponsor, they generally adapt more quickly to life in Canada or America or Australia, and because their private sponsor is financially responsible for the refugees, they have a strong incentive to help those refugees get working. About 70% of Canadian refugees under their program get work within a year of arrival, compared to 40% of regular refugees. So that's the theory. But does it work out in reality? Well, we can find out because friend of the show, Professor Ilya Somin, is actually a sponsor for one of these programs. He's a sponsor in the Uniting for Ukraine program, which provides 2 years of residency and job authorization for Ukrainians who are sponsored. 117,000 Ukrainians have come under that program in the last year. And Ilya is great to talk to because he's not only part of the program, but he's also a professor of law at George Mason University, and he's also an immigration expert. Perfect. The first thing I asked Ilya is, once the migrant gets to America, Does the government have to do anything at all?
The government has very little responsibility other than to look at the forms, and also when the parolees arrive in the U.S., they have to present their documents and so forth, and U.S. officials will try to make sure that they have the the necessary credentials and documents and so on.
Now, there seems to be a lot of concerns about the level of vetting for these migrants. So do you have any sense of just how thorough that vetting has been?
It's hard to know with certainty because obviously that most of the vetting occurs behind the scenes. They do have to present proof that they're Ukrainian citizens or residents of Ukraine, and there is some effort to check probably for things like whether there's a record of criminality or the like. By and large, the vetting process is pretty modest, but it's worth noting that these migrants, like migrants in general, have rates of crime and terrorism that are actually significantly lower than that of native-born Americans. So it doesn't seem like there's any significant vetting failure either with the Ukrainian program or other similar ones.
And from your personal observations, how well has the program seemed to work for both the parolees themselves and for America?
So obviously this program has been around for less than 2 years in the case of the Ukrainian one, so we don't have definitive data on it. However, both anecdotal data and data on migration generally going back years strongly suggest that it certainly works for the migrants in that they escape a terrible situation and get greater freedom and opportunity, and also it works for the U.S. economy and society because most of them quickly get to work, they contribute to our economy. There's also evidence that migrants disproportionately contribute to scientific innovation and entrepreneurship. They start businesses at higher rates than native-born citizens. So it's a win-win from the standpoint of both the migrants and the U.S. economy and society. It also strengthens America's position in the world. It's good public relations. And in the case of migrants who come in from countries that are hostile to us, we get the benefit of the work of the migrants and the hostile governments lose it.
I know you're just one example, Ilya, but how long did it take your migrant sponsorees to find work?
In the case of the first family that I sponsored, it came in December of 22. It only took a couple months for one of them to do it. He got a job as a security guard. The other one took 6 or 8 months, not because she didn't want to work, but because she was a hairdresser in Ukraine, in the state of Florida where she is. It is extremely difficult to get a hairdresser license because of restrictions that are meant to protect current hairdressers against competition. So even though she and I worked hard at getting her the license, it took some months to do it, but she eventually did get it, and she is working as a hairdresser now. My more recent sponsorees that only came just a few months ago are in the process of getting jobs and will likely have them very soon.
Now, you're involved with the Ukrainian parole program, but the main program people are freaking out about at the moment is the one involving Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti and Nicaragua. Do you have any sense of whether those programs are any different?
They're very similar in that they also require private sponsors and have the same form that you have to fill out and work in the same way. The only difference is that there is no numerical cap on the Ukrainian program. On the other hand, for the one for those 4 Latin American countries, there's a cap of $30,000 per month for migrants from all 4 countries combined. And this has actually made that program work less well than it otherwise would because there's currently a backlog of applicants with hundreds of thousands of them, and given over 1 million. And so as a result, that program is less efficient than it otherwise would be. I would note also that when the program was initially instituted, it actually massively reduced illegal border crossings by citizens of those 4 countries. But in more recent months, it crept back up somewhat because a lot of people who hoped they might enter legally through the CNVH program, they saw that there's this enormous backlog, so they felt either they're trapped in horrific poverty and oppression for even longer, or illegal migration might be their only option. So the principal difference between the program for the 4 Latin American countries and the Ukrainian one is that the Latin American one has this numerical cap.
Ilya Somin, thanks so much for visiting the Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a good man that Ilya Somin is.
He is. But in conclusion, to Trump, to the Center for Immigration Studies, and especially to Elon Musk, that is a bunch of malarkey.
Yes, it is. And we're out of time for another Fireside Chat. We'll be back with Planet America next Wednesday night from 9 p.m. on ABC iView and YouTube, and around 9:50 on ABC TV.
And do not forget the Pet Podcast and all the usual pod places right there. See you next week.
Bye-bye.